an Arab home is the most loving home, and an Arab home is the most trusting, and most generous, in my opinion, you know, because Arabs tend to give without expecting anything in return most of the time. I mean, to a fault, clearly, because look at what's happening with the world today.
Welcome to One in Tribe. I am your host, Julie Fidalgo, and today I am honored to have Walid Moannis with me. Walid Moannis is a Lebanese award winning director, writer, and producer. His work encompasses narrative and documentary features, music, films, music videos, and commercials. His first feature film as director, 1982, premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival and won the NetPAC Award, which is an award for the best Asian film from the Asia Pacific region. It also won the UNICEF Prize in 2021 and the Cannes Film Festival Young Audience Prize that same year. His short film, The Rifle, the Jackal, the Wolf, and the Boy, was Oscar shortlisted in 2017. It is an honor to have you here today with me, Walid.
Thank you, Julia. Julie.
Julie, I'm
Julie.
very proud about my name, so it's got to
Yes,
be Julie.
yes, yes.
So, Walid, I always like to start at the very beginning. Tell me where you were born.
Oh, wow, wow. We're going back to Liberia. That's
Yes,
where I was born in Liberia in West Africa. So, yes, and I spent the life between Lebanon and Liberia growing up.
so your parents are Lebanese.
My parents are Lebanese. My father had moved to Liberia in the late 50s, and then he was working there. And then basically, there was a huge expat community in Liberia, and I was born there. Yeah, and then he came back to Lebanon, got married, then went back to Liberia, then built a family, and yes.
Did you have family in Liberia, or was it just the Lebanese community that they were aware of that
It
brought them
was
there?
just the Lebanese community. I mean, my dad, when he first went, I think he went there because he had extended family, like cousins and stuff. So, and at the time, in the late 50s, early 60s, the Lebanese expat community was growing very, very quickly over there in West Africa. Not only Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria. Like, there's a lot of Lebanese people in West Africa.
So now you were born in Liberia, and then kind of walk us through your childhood.
Yeah, born in Liberia, went to first time on a plane, I was 5 years old, went to Lebanon, and then came back to Liberia just for vacation, and then came back to Liberia, and somehow my dad got a VCR. I'm gonna date. Basically, in 1976, my dad had a VCR shipped from the US to Liberia, along with the whole setup for videos, because video at the time was a new thing, right? So you have cinema at home. Uh, anyway, so that was 76, and then in 78 we went back to Lebanon again, and then somehow one of these, we used to get a lot of Betamax videotapes shipped over to us from all over the world, all these movies, because at the time there wasn't, the video rental business was just starting and there was very few of it. So we'd have all these tapes shipped from the US. And then we somehow, my brother and I saw a movie in which there was boarding school. And we obsessed over our parents sending us to boarding school. And guess what? They listened to us and they sent us to boarding school. I was seven. My older brother, I was seven. My older brother was eight. And we were in boarding school in Lebanon in the mountains. So that was kind of like, when I look at kids today, I'm like, how did my parents do that? They're like, well, you guys wanted it. So,
So funny.
yeah.
So, and then you did boarding school, and were they living in Lebanon or in Liberia
So
at the
my
time?
parents were living in Liberia. We only did it for 1 year, and then after that, we ended up staying at that school, but it was not boarding for the two following years. And then 1982 happened, and then we went back to Liberia.
Okay.
So,
And then we're going to obviously talk a lot about 1982 because you
mhm.
made a movie about it.
Yeah.
But you told me that you went to an all girls Catholic school.
Yes, that's high school. The last the last 2 years of high school were at a school in Lebanon called, it was an Irish Catholic school run by nuns. Uh, it was called Jesus and Mary. And what was interesting about this school is it was founded by a Saint Claudine Tavenet. And Claudine Tavenet Day was the 3rd of February. So that was my birthday. So whenever it was my birthday, we didn't have school. It was Walid holiday, as in Claudine holiday, Saint Claudine's holiday. So yes,
Interesting.
yes, I did that in the last 2 years of high school in Lebanon in the late 90s, late
Okay,
80s, early 90s. Yes.
but can you please explain how you ended up at an all girls Irish Catholic school?
Oh my, that's very funny. That's a very funny story because basically, okay, this is kind of a little bit of a saga. Is that okay?
Yes,
And
please.
the saga is as follows. So, at first, I went to Lebanon when I was 16 to go to like what we call secondary school, which is the last 3 years of high school, which is the equivalent of 11th, 12th, and 13th grade in Lebanon for us, which doesn't exist here. But anyway, so I went there. The first year I was okay. The second year, I had made a whole. I had decided that I wanted to just completely, I know this is going to sound very vapid, to be like popular and speak my mind and not hold back anything, right? So I succeeded in that, but in doing that, I kind of became this renegade student at the school because I would speak up to teachers. I talked truth to power. I was like, and I would whenever I would be, I was one of those students that was just very vocal and very quote unquote mischievous. But that was in an evangelical school in Lebanon, which is so right wing and so crazy and so narrow minded. It was insane that the principal of that school insisted that I was high on drugs. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, but sure, I'm learning from you now. So, so, anyway, so basically, my grades weren't that great in the second year at that school, and then he kind of wanted me to fail my class, and I did fail that year because I was supposed to repeat. I was already younger than I was the youngest person in the class all the time because I was always the youngest person in my class wherever I went. So I'm like, fine, okay, I'll repeat a year. But like in doing that, he had it out for me so bad that he wanted me to repeat my class at his school, which I
Okay.
refused to go to. So what he did is he literally called every school in Lebanon, okay, to tell them not to take me.
This
The
guy had a
only
vendetta against you.
Precisely, and it was very weird. And the only school, and then we had to figure out what the hell to do because I would refuse to go back to that school. And then I ended up through pulling some strings through whatnot. We ended up finding out that this all-girl Catholic school was actually starting to go co-ed, and they were taking, And I went, and I actually through pulling some strings, I ended up getting into that school because it was the only school that he couldn't prevent me from going into because it's not part of the evangelical school system, but rather the Catholic school system, and they don't communicate. And that's how I ended up in that school. And then in that school, it was me and another wonderful person, actually, who's an amazing doctor now, Cecilio. So we were both like in class together in the experimental sciences section of the school because in Lebanon there's three sections. There's experimental sciences, there's mathematics, and there's literary section, where it depends on how you focus and what you ultimately want to do with your career. Anyway, so it was two of us in a class, and it was like, and there were a few other boys in different classes because only in the secondary sections because they were going co-ed. So we were the first experiment of co-ed at that school.
Wow.
Yeah.
And is that the school that you graduated high school from?
It is.
It
It
is.
is. It was honestly one of the most beautiful educational experiences of my life because it's really I kind of grew. I kind of felt it was the first time I was in a school that actually nurtures, because the other school I was at was very suppressive and very unnurturing and completely anti the arts or anti music. I mean, we weren't even allowed to play music in that school. It's crazy. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like basically take a Southern Baptist and multiply that tenfold. It's like it was a very, very parochial school that I was at. And then so moving into this Catholic school, which is basically run by Irish nuns who are incredibly wonderful and supportive and understanding. It was, and I kind of became such a good student there because I was like, suddenly I mean, it's a two-way street. You have to feel supported, you have to feel trusted. When you give trust, you take trust back. And I was a teenager, of course, like the more you trust me, the more I trust you back. And there was a very mutual respect. And I never, as a student, felt disrespected in that school.
Mm.
Yeah. And then, yes, that's where I graduated from.
And when did the love of arts and movie making come in? You mentioned something about a VHS that your dad
Oh,
got a VCR.
ever since I was a kid, I mean, I remember like we would have these Betamax videotapes come in, and I remember like just watching them over and over and over. And at the time, what was interesting is I remember seeing The Incredible Hulk, okay, which was at the time a TV series, and of course The $6 Million Man, the majors, and then The Wizard of Oz. And then I remember watching The Exorcist even as a kid, and I remember not being able to sleep
Mhm.
because of that. But I kind of was upset. I would obsessively watch these movies over and over and over again, just in order to kind of understand. And then, literally, because we didn't have television, so all we had was tapes coming in, and it was like the just like Betamax tapes. It was Betamax. It wasn't VHS. It was small ones. And then I would just watch movie after movie after movie. And then what was interesting is for me, like the most memorable moments, like in the movie theater, I remember going and seeing a movie in Liberia's cinema for the first time, and I can't recall what it was, but because I was too young, I think I was like a kid, like. But the big film for me was when I went to Lebanon. I went with my uncle, and he took us to watch Close Encounters, and that was in 1981. And then after that, it was Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then those two films really did a number on me. And then the really big film, which nobody knows, is a film called Baghdad Cafe, which I think came out in '84. I was 12 or 13, and I just kept watching it over and over and over again. It just fascinated me. And yeah, I kind of knew that I wanted to tell stories. I kind of knew I wanted to write. I kind of knew even during the summer, all I would do was write and watch films. And yeah, and over time that kind of developed. I was told it was impossible because I was in Liberia. They're like, "What? You're gonna go what? Do where? What?" And then, I just felt like I needed to let go of this for a little bit. And I thought during my teen years that that was going to be a hopeless situation. And then when I got to university, I I studied journalism. That was my first major. And then I did a minor in television and theater. And it was that minor. I just felt like it was sort of, what do you call it? It was kind of meant to be because I was walking, the way that happened is I was walking on campus one day, and the student who had a senior student, and she had a play going on. She comes up to me. She's like, "Hey, I would love you to audition for this play." And I'm like, "I've never acted." She's like, "I don't know. I have a good feeling about this." And then I ended up like doing that audition, and it turned out to be The Father by August Strindberg, which is the most crazy play anybody did. And that was my first stint on stage. And I realized I loved it, but I also had such immense stage fright that I'd rather be on the other side. And then that kind of drove me. So I did my journalism. In the interim, I also ended up doing a minor in radio television and then another major in theater, where I directed theater. And then from there, I kind of got a job. And then I knew I wanted to go into cinema, came to the US, and the rest. there's a lot of rest of history. I mean, that's a whole other story. Yeah,
Okay, so wait one second. I just want to back up because I'm very curious. Your college was, where did you go to university?
Beirut.
In Beirut.
Undergraduate was in Beirut, graduate school was in the US. Undergraduate was journalism with minors in television, film, and theater. And then graduate school was in and graduate school was in cinema and film here at Florida State.
Florida State. Okay.
Yeah.
So have you been in the States since?
In the States, yes,
Yeah.
I have
Oh,
actually. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
okay.
I came to FSU and I thought I was going to be there for just the 2 years. And then you know how you get the optional practical training. So what I did is I did my 2 years, finished that, and then I'd always wanted to do a road trip in the US, a cross-country road trip. So that was for me very, very like a dream. So what happened is we graduated, and then five of us decided to drive across the country to come to LA. And
Mm.
then I come to LA, and then sure enough, like, oh, okay, oh, this is Hollywood. Oh, okay, this is what it is. And then I just started working, really. I did all sorts of odd jobs in film. I did everything from working as a temp to working as an electric to working as a first camera assistant for a while because I thought I was going to go in that direction. And then I realized I'm like, no, this isn't what I wanted. I just wanted to kind of write and direct. So I kind of stepped back and started PAing. And then it turns out that the first film I ended up editing and co-producing ended up at South by Southwest about a year and a half after I was in LA, which was kind of like unexpected. And then that took off, and then after that, I just kind of ended up started, suddenly I was 20, I was like literally in 2002, I get asked to run this production company just based on my work ethic, which was amazing. So I ran that from 2000 to 2005. And then from there, in the interim, I also grew very much as a music video producer as well. I did a lot of work in that space and then also documentaries. By 2005, I had produced the first documentary, which was David LaChapelle's Rise, which is a beautiful film, which is that. Um, and that was amazing. And one thing led to another, and then I just kept doing. So now I produce, I write, I direct. If something that speaks to my heart. The good thing is, I worked so much in the music video space, but I also feel like I had the privilege of working with some incredible artists that it really sort of. I was very discerning in what I chose to work with, and the artists I chose to work with, and had the privilege to work with, and that was yeah. I feel yeah, it feels good.
You manifested. That
Yeah,
little boy that used to love
yeah,
going to the
yeah,
movies. That's
yeah,
that's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. So I think where there's a will and there's kind of a way, and it's not nothing is easy, and it takes building upon building upon building. Like, sometimes when you talk to people, they're like, oh, they think it just happened. I'm like, it didn't just happen. Everything is a building block to something else, and there is no job too small as long as you're serving, like you're going into this conduit of what you want to do, and you stay close to it. Because when I came to LA, like, I knew I want to write and direct, but I also feel like because I since undergraduate, I also was always a good writer director. But when I moved to LA, I'm like, as a director, I feel you always have to have something to say. As a producer, you do as well, but like sometimes it's not your project, and what you want to do is you want to support these projects. And and I feel like I'm one of those people who can support other directors in realizing their visions while slowly working on mine as well. I don't feel one is necessarily a compromise on the other, because I'm proud of all the work that I still do as a producer, and proud of 1982, and proud of The Rifle of Jack and the Wolf and the Boy. But those are messages that are very important to me, which are anti-war messages, peer messages, peace messages, and this is really what drives me, and and the human condition. And what's interesting is when I did the first film, which was Kitchen Privileges for Sundance, for which we went to South by with, that was amazing. It was such a fantastic experience. And then right after that, like the second major film I did was Rise, which is that. And this sort of happened if I would say synergy and if I would say trusting in the energy of the world and how things happen, because one of the most beautiful things about this film is it was a humanist documentary that we shaped as a narrative documentary, and it's about kids in South Central LA, and instead of the choice of going into gang violence, you go into dance offing each other. And it's a very life affirming film that completely speaks to the purpose of the work that I do, which is a social consciousness and an egalitarianism in the work and the ability of hope. And I feel like all films I do and everything that I do that means something to me carries a message of hope. So, yeah,
I love that.
yeah.
Well, let's talk about 1982. That's your baby,
Mhm.
right? So, how did the idea come up? And just tell us about that process.
It's interesting because I never thought that this would be a film. I was writing a collection of short stories, and that collection of short stories had a story which was I didn't yet had a title for it, but it was like the story took place in 1982, and it really described that moment in time in my life of like realizing and understanding the fact that there is such a thing as war and there is such a thing as invasion and there is such a thing. I mean, that was so somehow it had marked me, and I tried to write it as a short story. And when you write, you kind of revise and revise and revise. You try to find the heart of it. And this short story, I had a very hard time writing because I wrote it and I felt, oh, every time I write it, like it would wreck me. It was very emotional, and I felt it was, you know what I mean? It never really hit as a short story enough. And then, it just, you keep revisiting these works. And I wanted to revisit this moment in my life where it was for the first time that I actually saw how horrid war is, but at the same time, how incongruous it is and how hard it is to understand and assimilate as a kid, right? Because, I mean, the 1982 primarily posits itself from the point of view of the kids, which is basically, uh, as a kid, you're sort of aware a lot, but you sort of don't understand a lot, but you're very aware. Like you have and and what happened is, as time was ambling along, then I was traveling through France, and and I knew, I mean, I'm a filmmaker, so I follow a lot of filmmakers and whatnot, and I know that the film Waltz with Bashir, which is an Israeli film made by Ari Folman, had come out, and I knew that I wanted to see it. It was a film about a massacre that was committed in 1982. Very, very dark film, but very brilliant piece of cinema, and I felt the need to go see it. And I literally landed in Paris. I left the airport, went to the movie theater, watched the film, came back to the airport, took my flight, and continued on to Beirut. That's how badly I wanted to see that film.
Was it only showing in Paris? Was it not
It had,
showing in Beirut?
no, no, no. You couldn't. No, it wouldn't have shown in Beirut because it's an Israeli film, and there is no cultural communication between the two countries. Um, and I think it was very necessary that, I mean, I believe that cinema is the one medium, actually the arts are mediums that need to transcend borders because they create understanding and dialogue. And this film is a documentary, and it's a documentary about what happened in that led up to the most horrific massacre committed in 1982 after the invasion of Israel, when Beirut was actually embargoed by the Israeli army. Anyway, so it was a very moving film, and at the same time, so I watched it. I thought it was brilliant, and I thought it was necessary film, especially coming from an Israeli, because it's about really looking inwards and looking about what happens when the oppressor becomes the oppressed. What happens that the person who thought they were the good person becomes the monster. This is really the essence of that film, and it's really a question of the moral stance of which ironically reflects to this day, and I still think it's a struggle in Israeli society today. It's like, how do we not become the monster we were afraid of? And this film really goes there with it. So about a few months, about a year later, I was sitting in Paris and we were talking, and suddenly 1982 came up, and like I was surrounded by like some people from all over, and there were some Lebanese people, some not Lebanese people. It's like, where were you when this happened? And then I'm like, and then I describe where I was, which is actually what the film is, which is I was at school, ABCD, this is what happened. And this was the first time I actually ever heard an Israeli jet and heard the monstrosity of that. And this is actually the day that I kind of understood that there was something called Israel, because it was like, what is this? It was like for a kid, it was really kind of like hearing horror for the first time in sonic madness. And anyway, so I'm like, this is where I was. And then someone said, oh, you should make this into a film. I'm like, there isn't a film there. No. I mean, I was still like, I just said that I wrote this as a short story, but I can't seem to bring it because every time I talk about it, I would get very emotional. And and this person just stayed in touch and she kept telling me that I should write it into a feature. I'm like, you know what? Let me see what I can do. And then I went back and I went back to the story and then I kind of started fleshing it out. So writing it out as a story and then I wrote it out and then it became real, and then it turned out yes, there was a feature in there. And because it's a slice of life moment in time feature, and the thing is, my nature, I'm not a violent nature. I don't believe in violence. I believe in coexistence. And I believe like you have to look at the past in order to forgive, to move into the future. Otherwise, the cycle of violence continues. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who refuse to look at this from, to forgive and to move forward and to be able to be open to the other. Even though a lot of people claim they are, a lot of people, as we've seen, are not. Uh, so so yeah, so that became the movie, and then for me, it's basically my anthem and my cry that that war should not happen and that there's no point to it, because the irony of it all is 1982 is about 1982, which is actually 42 years, and then now you think that things get solved by war. Clearly they haven't, because to this day it hasn't been solved by war. And essentially, the principles that have destroyed Lebanon over the years and Palestine over the years are still very much alive today, and people don't want to listen to them. And it's a choice. I mean, 1982 is a film about hope. It's a film that sort of says that at the end of the film, it begs the question, is like, do we need something way bigger than us in order to stop us from killing each other? And which at the end of the day, the film goes into the kid's imagination, because the kid's imagination is an uncontaminated imagination, you know.
Mm.
Uh, and that's where 1982 came about, and I felt I had to tell the story. And as I decided to make this film, I realized that nobody had addressed this issue in that year in Lebanon, because it's very polemic. The country was split, we have to admit that. And there were people who were supportive, unfortunately, of the invasion, and there were people, and they were basically the right wing. And then the rest of the country was completely living the horror of that invasion. And I happened to be on the side that did not live the horror of that invasion to the extent that most of Lebanese people have. And, and I just felt I had to say it. And what's important for this film is, when you make a film like that, you make a film like that not because you want to preach to the converted, but because you want to display, you want to show who you are to the people who never thought who you are, to whom you've been demonized.
Mm.
And what's interesting about this is I realized through this film that uh, us as Lebanese people and Lebanon as a whole has been royally demonized in Israeli media, press, and education. And unfortunately, to this day, so when you make a film like that, which kind of completely humanizes and changes the perspective, I didn't think that this film would have resistance, but it does have resistance, because people refuse to see each other. You know what I mean? Because creating the most important thing that could propel peace or propel discussions is the power of empathy. And this film works precisely on that. So this is a film, in my opinion, that needs to be seen by every Israeli so they can understand who we are as Lebanese people, you know? and unfortunately, it has not been like screened properly in Israel. I'm sure it's been bootlegged here and there, but in general, I made this as a piece of dialogue, as a film that opens a forum for dialogue. But right now, the state of the world, it's so heated that nobody is prepared for that dialogue. And the pain right now, the new pain is so raw that it's going to be hard to recover to get to us to a place where there is dialogue.
So much to unpack with everything that you just mentioned. It's so sad. Lebanon, it's such a small country with, I believe, 5 million, population of 5 million, and so many different sects,
Yeah,
right? And they're just stuck in the middle, and it's so tragic. And again, this whole podcast is to humanize the Arabs,
yeah,
including obviously the
yeah,
Lebanese.
yeah.
And if only we can see each other for humans, for what we all are.
Well, I think we can. I mean, I think we can if we're allowed to. I don't like to think that we're not. I just think that though sometimes it's easier to choose to view the other not as human, as we've seen in what's happening in Palestine right now. Um, and I don't know. I mean, it's a choice, sadly. Um,
It's fear, it's brainwash.
it's brainwash. It's brainwash, and I think brainwash is fear, and and I think the fear is unfounded, and I think the fear is in generally it's fundamentally in the miseducation, and I do think that um, you know, there's been a few incredible Israeli historians and education scholars who have realized how dangerous the education is, or the history curriculum is in Israel, that's actually led us to where we are today. Because because essentially, I mean, we all know the adage that history is written by the victor, okay? And a victor sometimes has a lot of reason to lie, you know? And we are reaping, reaping, that's what's been sowed, and that's what's been sowed in Israeli society.
I think a lot of it's them or us, right?
Yeah,
It's there is no coexistence.
and we're one, and historically we've always been one up until 1948 and the creation of a new curriculum that actually does them and us. At the end of the day, we're one. I mean, Lebanon to this day is fairly mixed, actually. There's everybody, like all religions exist in Lebanon. I also do have a lot of Jewish Lebanese friends and who are very dear and near to me, and we're all horrified by what's going on, and for them, like it's just abhorrent what's going on.
I don't think most people in the West, especially, know that there are Jewish people in the Arab world. Like you just said, you have friends that are Lebanese Jews, or people don't realize that before 1947, Christians, Muslim, Jews, they
Everybody lived together.
they all lived together in peace.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, we've all lived together in peace up until not up to, I mean, basically things started to get really dicey in like 1917 moving forward, when there was like the rise of what I would say at the time, we talk about terrorist um, factions today. There were at the time also terrorist factions, but they were primarily the Irgun, the Haganah, those terrorist factions that rose in Israel, which ultimately ended up leading to 1948. But there was a lot of like violence back and forth in before 1948, which led to 1948, and then so so yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, what happened is you have the indigenous Jewish population, which is essentially uh, us, like as Lebanese people, and then a lot of Iraqis, a lot of Jordanians, a lot of there's Jewish people like everywhere: Iraq, Iran, Jordan, Tunisia, like we're everywhere.
Hmm.
Okay? So what is what is fascinating for me is the fact that this whole thing, this whole identity was completely destroyed as what I would say Western, I would say as Zionism started to expand, and then you ended up having a lot of European Jewish majority actually coming into the area and co-opting that those localized identities of Judaism. Um, and that's, I mean, now we're getting into a deeper history. So there's a lot of historians, Israeli and Arab, like you have Ilan Pape, who talks about it. You have Miko Peled. There's a lot of Israeli historians who unpack a lot of these issues. And what's interesting is um, is that's really created an identity that is actually inaccurate, an identity that's actually very parochial to what Judaism is,
Mm,
because at the end of the day, Judaism is a religion. But within that, you have Yemenite Jews whose food is their food. You have Moroccan Jewish contingents. You have, you know what I mean? Like, there's all these different identities of these people because they're assimilative identities. I mean, to this day, nobody talks about it, but like the Jewish contingency and the Jewish population of Iran is the most protected population as in Iran.
I didn't know that.
Nobody talks about this because, at the end of the day, like nobody's out for the religion. I mean, historically, growing up, even in our news in Lebanon, you never hear the word Judaism, Jewish. Like Christians, Muslims, Jews in a particular context, sure, multitude of religions, but at the end of the day, in terms of like the news and the animosity, Judaism does not factor in. What does factor in, unfortunately, is Zionism, which has completely upstaged Judaism. And they are two completely separate things. That's an ideology that's expansionist. Maybe there is a part of that ideology that is actually good in terms of its aspirational uniformity and bringing people together, but that's a metaphor. Like, yes, I mean, if you're Jewish and you want to move back to Israel and Palestine or whatever it is, great. You're more than welcome to buy your way and move back there, but that doesn't mean you have to kill people and steal land and all of that in order to do that. I mean, do it with justice. I don't think anybody would have ever had a problem with that. Does that
Yeah,
make
I
sense?
think yeah, I think people tend to put Judaism and Zionist in one, and it's not. We
Sure.
know that Zionism is an ideology. The religion has nothing to do with it.
Nothing to do with it. And also, I mean, Judaism, I mean, I mean, part of my there's a whole branch of my extended family historically that was Jewish that converted. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
like chances are, if I go back about 400 and 500 years, my roots are the same. I mean, we are of that land, from that land, and the synagogues do exist and did exist all over this land. And
Mm.
during the Ottoman Empire, there was never bias. Nobody was ever like attacked for their religion. It was actually, as a matter of fact, one of the most pluralistic empires that existed. I'm sure it had its violent bursts, but in general, like everybody was everybody and everybody coexisted during that empire. It all
Yeah.
really started to go downhill from World War One, vis-a-vis what's in terms of what's happening in the Middle East. But also, I think part of it is sort of the ideology and the religions are used to kind of create heated schisms in order to also control resources, which is what this whole thing has become about.
Of course. Of
Anyway,
course.
now we're getting into really political discussions.
Yeah, we are. And it would be lovely to go there, but there are a couple
But
things
yeah,
that
yeah,
I,
let's
I
not
want to
do.
I want to talk about with
I
you.
wasn't expecting us to go there, so
Say that again.
I said I wasn't expecting that we'd go into that. So
Well, this is what I love. I just want the conversation to just flow and
yeah,
see where it goes. And I think that's very educational.
yeah,
And, as long as there's value in the information, I think that's what's important.
yeah.
One thing I do want to mention,
Hmm.
it's kind of off topic, but it has to do with 1982, is that you got to work with Nadine Labaki.
Hmm.
Labaki?
Yeah,
How
Lebanon.
was that experience? She's a huge movie star in Lebanon. What
Hmm.
was that like?
She's wonderful. She was so real, so present, and I think she, as you saw in the film, I mean, what she does is she brings, for me, she represents the country in such an amazing way. Like, she represents the Lebanese mother, she represents the Lebanese teacher, she embodies this role. And I do think that Nadine, for who she is in visa for the Lebanese people and for Lebanon, I mean, she is definitely what do you call it, an ambassador in
Mm.
terms of representation of our culture, in terms of representation of our internationalism. Um, she was very, I mean, she was absolutely wonderful to deal with. She was so down to earth. She was so trusting. She was going through a bit of a tough time because she was giving birth she had just given birth to her daughter at the time, and she was in the midst of finishing her movie, Capernaum, which, as you know, got ultimately nominated for an Academy Award. A very, very powerful film, highly emotional. Uh, and I mean, she like when we first started working together, she's like, Walid, like I just want you to know that I'm an actor. I know I'm a director, but with you, I'm an actor. And she did incredible as an actor because she also managed to capture nuances that would have been difficult to explain to other actors, I think.
Mm.
Because as a director, there was a little bit of a shorthand in terms of how to switch things on and off and build the performance and build the character. But the one thing that's really rung through is that the experience of that role and the experience of the role she played was so universal vis-a for a Lebanese mother and a teacher in that era and even to this era that it just is, yeah, it just is it's great.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
encourage the audience to definitely check out 1982. It's available on Amazon Prime. It's a great film, talks about, go ahead.
It's Amazon. It's also available, like in the US, it's available on Canopy as well and on Roku, Amazon, Apple 4, I think. I think there might be a fifth, I don't know what, but yes. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, let's talk about The Rifle, the Jackal, the Wolf, and the Boy.
Oh,
What were,
yes.
oh, I loved that one. It's a short
I know.
film. Oscar shortlisted. That's quite a accomplishment.
Yeah. That film was so from the heart and so I wrote that film in one day.
Wow.
Yeah, I was trying to raise money for 1982, and even though I had a very good producer pedigree, people could not believe that I would be able to make 1982 because of all the children and whatnot. And I'm like, okay. And then I was getting turned down for every grant. I would make the shortlist but never win the grant. And I'm like, okay. And then I met with a really wonderful person who runs grants, and he's like, Walid, like the package is very strong. It's just like the jury is always having a hard time under seeing how you could possibly make this film with all these kids and all these layers of because there's social layers, there's philosophical layers, there's political layers, all of those, and they have to be very subtle. And do they work or do they not? So I was in Berlin and I was like, okay, so I guess I have no choice. I have to make a short film. And I got on the flight, and this idea has been brewing in my head. And what's interesting about how the rifle came to mind is I was going to Lebanon in 2014 a lot, in 2015, and ISIS was trying to come in through our borders at the time, and which was and then the Lebanese army and at the time Hezbollah were fighting tooth and nail to keep them out because it's radical and because of the parading of violence that we were witnessing coming out of Syria and out of like all the places that were ISIS were controlling, and they were destroying churches. And anyway, so there was a fear, an inherent fear, something very unsettling was brewing, and I just felt like I needed to express that. So I got on the plane. I'm like, okay, I can't do ABCD. This has to be a parable and it has to be a morality tale. And I just remembered, I don't know if you probably have read this, Every Man, the Morality Tale. We read in high school. It's a medieval morality. Like somehow in my mind, like I kind of wanted to be in that space of, and then I literally sat on the plane. I got ticket. I used miles to upgrade my flight so I can fly comfortably. I did not watch any TV the moment the flight got took off, I started writing. The moment the flight landed, I had finished the first draft. So,
Incredible.
yeah, I mean, it flowed. It just came out. Like it's crazy, that story. It just came out, and I remember finishing it and then suddenly like sobbing. I'm like, okay, when that reaction happens, it means something is right about what you wrote, and it felt organic.
Mm.
And then I literally did polishes on it for 5 days, and I sent it to Lebanon. I'm like, I'm coming to shoot this. They thought I was joking. I'm like, no, I need to shoot this. If I'm to get these grants, I need to shoot this. And I call up one of the people who, for the grants, I'm like, how much time do I have if I need to submit it? And he's like, well, you have this much time if you need to submit a short film or an additional work to the piece. Yes, we'll take it, but this is your. So basically, I went to Lebanon, I shot the short within 5 weeks. And then 2 weeks later, I sent a rough cut to all the grants organizations, and I got all the grants based on that. And then I didn't even think I was going to finish the film because I did it as an exercise, right?
Mm.
And then someone sees the film and they're like, oh no, this is really good. And then you need to qualify it. And then suddenly there was a distributor that saw it and they're like, this is amazing. This is one of the best shorts we've seen this year. And they're a very credible shorts company because they do a lot of the Oscar short. And they're like, this needs to be qualified. And they qualified it. And before it even did any festivals, it was Oscar shortlisted, which is amazing. And that's what triggered our ability to close the financing on 1982 and get that greenlit.
People have no idea how complicated the movie business is
Yeah.
and raising funds to get a movie made and how you had to make a short film to get the grants for the feature film.
Yeah.
But I also encourage my audience to check out where can they find that film?
I just have the right, I just got the rights back now
Okay.
for that film. So in the Middle East, it's available. If someone's listening from the Middle East, it's available on, what's it called? On OSN.
Okay.
It's available. They can stream it. In the rest of the world, it's no longer available. I have to, but what I'm thinking is it might become available very soon on Vimeo.
Okay.
So we
If somebody wants to watch it, can they send
they
you an
can reach out
email
to
for the
me. Yeah,
link?
they can reach out to me. I'll be happy to send an email. Absolutely.
That's
I
how
can
I got
send
to
it.
watch it.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I
Great.
mean it's a film I'm very proud of because I think the message is very strong. And I think it's a complete anti-violence message. It's really follows the same ethos to some degree of 1982. It's the fact that violence only begets violence, even if the intention is good. That's the most important point in that, because you can go like what we're going through right now is the fact that in the world today is like there's all this violence that's coming on, and everybody thinks that this violence is warranted
Mm.
because it's for the good. I don't believe that any violence, even if for the good, is warranted because it'll only plant the seeds of further violence. If it's not tomorrow, then it's after tomorrow. If it's not after tomorrow, it's in a year or another generation. Violence only begets violence because it's a yin and yang.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. I
well,
mean, I wish we could live in a world where there was no war,
yeah.
but historically there's always been war, right? And
That doesn't make it. I mean, yes, but it's inexcusable in today's world, given where we are with our technology, with our understanding, with our ability to help each other. Because we live in a time where there is absolutely no reason for anybody to be hungry. We live in a time where you know what I mean? The only reason there's hunger is because there's greed.
Mhm.
The only reason there's war is because there's theft. So
Because what?
there's theft, you know? Uh, and basically, you would die to defend your land, but someone would die to defend their land, defending their land. Someone else would kill to steal it, which is exactly what we're witnessing today. Yeah,
Precisely.
yeah. So,
Our time is coming to an end, but before we conclude this
yeah,
wonderful episode,
yeah.
what is a misconception about the Arab world, or what would you like the Western audience to know about Arabs or Lebanon or whatever it is that you want to touch upon, the message that you want to put out there?
Um, that we have the exact same emotional constructs as the rest of the world. A kid is a kid. We have the same crushes, the same loves, the same aspirations. And the only thing that separates us is basically miseducation. The Arab world is the most hospitable place imaginable. You know, an Arab home is the most loving home, and an Arab home is the most trusting, you know, and most generous, in my opinion, you know, because Arabs tend to give without expecting anything in return most of the time. I mean, to a fault, clearly, because look at what's happening with the world today. Our generosity, you know, yeah, is costing us a lot, but that's not going to change the fact that we must remain generous and we are who we are.
People have no idea. I think one thing about the Arab world is the hospitality
Yeah,
and the generosity and the
yeah,
kindness.
yeah.
And it's so sad that people just don't know. And one of the messages is just go visit,
Go
right?
visit.
Like
Go visit.
Lebanon is such a beautiful, well, not now, obviously, but it's such a pity that Lebanon is stuck in the middle and
Well, hopefully we're coming out of a very dark period. I mean, we're hoping. We'll see. I mean, even what's happening in Syria right now, while it's amazing that there's been a government change finally. Uh, the hope is that that is actually for the better. I mean, because I know Syrian people who are as incredibly beautiful and as generous. I know Palestinian people who are as generous. So at the end of the day, I mean, all one has to watch is the Anthony Bourdain show also on both Lebanon and Palestine, and they'll come to understand who we are. You
yeah,
know, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
But I love your message of hope. I love, keep telling your beautiful stories.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
is there another project in the horizon
There are
soon?
several. There are several. So we'll see. I'm not at liberty to talk about them. There's one that I'm very, very excited about, actually, that kind of is, but it's about two more years of work to get it out in the world, and I think it's going to be very unexpected and beautiful.
Great.
It's a documentary, so
Okay.
yeah.
And Walid, where can our audience find you, follow you?
I'm on Instagram, walid.muanis.com, my name. I'm also on Facebook, but I'm better on Instagram and I'm better on Twitter as well. So, and I usually respond to any private messages, or if anybody wants anything, they can reach out. So there was a moment when I wasn't reading messages and I had hundreds of unread messages that I had to sift through. Oh my God, I was like, what is going on? I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of messages, and then I had to, like, I think a few weeks ago, I just sat there and I started going through the messages and being like, yeah.
Okay, great.
So
So again, if anybody is interested in watching The Rifle, the Jackal, the Wolf, and the Boy, it's a great short film. Just send Walid an email and he will send you the link. Obviously, 1982 on Amazon Prime and Canopy, you said?
Canopy, if you have a library card, Canopy is open to all library, and then it's also available on Roku.
Okay,
So those are without having to pay. I think on Apple TV and Amazon, it's behind a paywall. So
perfect.
yeah. All right.
Walid, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for joining me, and I look forward to your future projects.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, thank you for your message of hope.
Thank you.